Senator Latz.
Mr. President, Red Lake, Rocori High School, Annunciation, Minnesota mass shootings in our schools. Here we go again. We're back trying to pass public policy to prevent these tragedies, or at least to reduce the fatalities that result when firearms are used. And so often we are told, now's not the time to act because emotions are too high. That's what we hear in the immediate aftermath. And then when emotions supposedly calm down a bit, we've got a chance to have some rational thought, to come up with ideas, to put pen to paper, make a list of ways we can respond. Then we're told, no, we really don't need to do that. Senator Mohammed and I convened a working group last September in response to the Annunciation shooting on the heels of the legislative shootings in June. We were told then those who opposed these changes didn't have time to consider what steps to take. I don't know, it took me all of 5 minutes to sit down and write out a list of steps that we could take. So it really wasn't about whether or not there was sufficient time. And we get here today now. We're almost a year after the legislative shootings and 10 months after Annunciation, and there's been plenty of time. Plenty of time to think about what steps we can take, plenty of time to look at the research, which is indisputable, about what steps can reduce firearm fatalities and loss, homicides and suicides. And we have what's in front of us here today. Pretty comprehensive approach, a pretty well-balanced approach, an evidence-based approach. And I will remind members it's not just about suicide or homicides, it's about suicides too. Because access to firearms can turn a momentary emotional crisis into, as we've already heard, a lifetime of grieving and a tragic loss. We saw that in the data when the federal firearm or assault weapons ban was enacted, lasted for 10 years, then it expired, and while it was in effect, we saw a reduction in assault weapon and firearm deaths, and when it expired, we saw an increase. We've seen it around the country historically with the red flag laws, where they had 11 to 14% reduction in suicide rates in states that have them. The data is unmistakable, and we can look now at the over 400 uses of the red flag law in Minnesota, and we can identify many cases where people are still alive because they were separated from their firearms at a time when they were not in a position to safely have access to them. Also remind people that the greatest cause of death in Minnesota by firearms, it's not homicide, actually, it's suicide, and most of that's in greater Minnesota, and it's white middle-aged males. But it's also our youth who have easier access to firearms. What's particularly troubling to me is that the A50 amendment, when it was offered, and even upon some questioning, was not thoroughly described as to what it was doing. The attempt was to bring it back to focusing on safety in the schools, but most of the provisions in the A50 amendment were deleting this and deleting that. So I'm just going to remind members, those who voted for the A50 amendment, You voted to keep firearms more easily accessible to convicted violent felonies living with an eligible person. You voted to allow more 3D printing of untraceable guns. You voted to allow the doubling of the rate of fire for binary triggers. You voted to continue the sale of weapons of war, assault weapons, in Minnesota. You voted to allow unlimited bullet capacity for firearms, increasing the ability to kill more people more quickly, rather than at least interrupting the carnage for a moment to reload when perhaps that carnage can be stopped. You voted to allow loose and unsafe storage of guns on school property. And incomprehensibly, you voted to not fund research on how to prevent violent crime. You voted to stop, or at least not fund, the research on how to stop violent crime. Why would you not want to know what it is that causes violent crime? What's going on in the heads of the youth or the adults that are committing these offenses? How are they accessing the firearms that they use to commit those violent crimes? Don't you want to know? Or is this all about virtue signaling? Members, we can do better than the A50 Amendment. We soundly or wisely rejected that. And the public will understand who voted for what in that A50 Amendment. And the public will know who votes for Senate File 4067, Senator Mohammed's very wisely put together comprehensive package to reduce gun violence in Minnesota. The public deserves to know. And the people that we represent deserve us to try to protect them from those who would do harm to themselves or to others. Let's do that today. Let's stand up, find the internal courage, personal or political courage, to do the right thing here today, and vote green on this bill.